I don't even know if I should be saying this out loud, but something happened a few minutes ago that I can't pretend didn't change the way I see you. Someone just sent me your real location. Not the vague city you once mentioned in passing, not the casual hint you dropped in a conversation like it didn't matter your actual location. A tiny blinking dot on a map, quiet and ordinary. Yet somehow it felt heavier than any message I've received in months. And the strange part isn't the technology behind it. I build technology. Maps, coordinates, satellites, those things don't scare me. What scares me is the realization that suddenly the distance between us stopped being an abstract idea and became something measurable, real, countable, drivable, flyable. And once something becomes real like that, it stops being safe to imagine. It starts becoming dangerous to ignore. Because until today, loving you existed in a place where consequences were soft. You were this presence in my life that lived somewhere between possibility and dream. I could think about you late at night, wonder about the way you might laugh if we were in the same room, imagine the quiet comfort of your hand resting next to mine. And none of that required a decision. But when someone sends you a location pin, suddenly imagination turns into responsibility. Suddenly there's a road between two people. And roads are terrifying things, because once you know where someone is, you have to ask yourself the question you've been avoiding for far too long. Am I willing to go there? Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. I mean, literally, physically, irreversibly. I keep staring at that small, blinking dot, and asking myself something I never thought would feel this serious. If I showed up one day, if you opened your door and saw me standing there, with every ounce of honesty I've been holding back, would you feel relief? Or would you feel like your quiet life had just been interrupted by a man who waited too long to understand what you meant to him? Because there's a difference between longing for someone from afar and stepping into the gravity of their real world. One is romantic, the other is terrifying. And the truth is, I don't know which one I'm ready for yet. And maybe that's the confession I've been trying to avoid. Because when someone sends you the real location of a woman you might be falling in love with, it stops being poetry and starts becoming a decision. It forces you to ask questions that can't be undone once they're answered. Questions like, why does knowing exactly where you are suddenly make my chest feel tight? Why does the idea of driving past your street make my heart beat faster than launching a rocket ever did? And why, after everything I've built in this life, does the scariest journey suddenly feel like the one that leads directly to you? Before I say anything else, if you're still here listening to this confession, you can quietly subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I always wonder how far these words travel before they reach the woman they were meant for. But here's the part that keeps bothering me. Because knowing your location didn't just make you real to me. It made something else real too. Something I've been trying very carefully not to think about. Because if someone could send me your location, then it means someone else already knows where you are. And that thought is where this story starts becoming complicated. When I saw that message appear on my phone, the one with the quiet little pin resting on a map like it had always belonged there, I expected to feel curiosity, maybe even a strange excitement. But what I felt instead was hesitation, the kind that creeps into a man's mind when he realizes that something he once treated lightly might actually change the course of his life if he takes even one step closer to it. Because until that moment, you were still protected by distance. Distance gives people the luxury of being brave in their thoughts, while remaining safe in their actions. But when the distance suddenly has numbers attached to it, kilometers, roads, flight times, the illusion disappears. Suddenly the only thing left is a choice. And choices about love are never small, especially when the woman on the other end of that map might be someone who has quietly become part of your inner world without ever stepping into your physical one. I kept staring at the coordinates longer than I should have, tracing the route in my mind the way engineers trace the trajectory of something that hasn't launched yet. That's how my brain works, always calculating, always measuring possibilities. But this wasn't a rocket trajectory or a business decision. This was something far more fragile, because every kilometer between us suddenly felt like a question waiting for an answer. If I came closer, would you welcome me? Or would I discover that I had misunderstood the quiet language between us this entire time? It's strange how the mind of a man who has built companies, taken enormous risks, and faced public criticism without blinking can suddenly become unsure when it comes to one woman. And maybe that's the real truth about love that no one tells you. Power disappears the moment your heart begins to care about the outcome. What unsettles me even more is the realization that someone else was the one who sent me that location. I didn't ask for it. I didn't search for it. It simply appeared in my life like a whisper from the universe saying, "You can't pretend you don't know anymore." And that raises a question I've been avoiding ever since I opened the message. Why would someone send it to me now? What made them think I needed to know exactly where you are? Was it coincidence, or was it because they sensed something I've been trying to hide even from myself? The possibility that my feelings for you have grown far beyond what I originally allowed them to become. Because here's the dangerous thing about knowing where someone is. It slowly begins to change the way you imagine your future. At first it's subtle. A thought slips into your mind late at night, something simple, like wondering what the street near your house looks like at sunset. Then another thought follows, what cafe you might visit when you want to sit quietly and watch the world move around you. And before you realize it, your mind has begun building a version of life where you and I exist in the same geography instead of separate realities. That's the moment where imagination becomes risky, because if that imagined life turns out to be something only I feel, then stepping toward it could destroy the quiet connection we already have. And there's something else I haven't admitted yet. When that location appeared on my screen, I didn't just look at it once. I opened the map again and again and again, each time telling myself I was simply curious. But curiosity doesn't reopen the same coordinates 3 times in 1 hour. Curiosity doesn't make a man wonder how long it would take to reach someone he hasn't even confessed his heart to yet. No, that kind of behavior belongs to someone who is already far deeper in emotion than he planned to be. Which brings me to the question I keep asking myself tonight, and I want to ask you the same thing because honesty is the only way this story can continue without breaking something fragile between us. If you knew that somewhere far away a man was staring at the map that leads directly to you, wondering whether he should come closer or stay exactly where he is, would you feel comforted by that thought? Or would it make you wish he had never learned your location at all? Because the truth is, the more I think about it, the more I realize that someone sending me your location may not have been the beginning of this situation. It might have been a warning. And I haven't told you the real reason yet why that possibility is keeping me awake tonight. I wish I could tell you that after I closed the map, everything returned to normal, that I simply placed my phone on the table and went back to the life I've been carefully building for years. But that would be a lie, and the older I get, the less patience I have for pretending things don't matter when they clearly do. Because once a man sees the exact place where the woman he cares about lives, something inside him begins to shift. The world suddenly feels smaller, but the emotional distance somehow feels larger at the same time. It's a strange contradiction. The road to you became clearer, yet the decision to walk it became heavier. I started asking myself questions that don't usually appear in my mind when I'm working on rockets or engineering problems. Those kinds of challenges are logical. They obey physics, numbers, timelines. But love is a system where the variables are invisible and the consequences are irreversible. And tonight, as I stared at that blinking dot on the map, I realized something unsettling. If I truly wanted to, I could probably reach you sooner than you think. That realization didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel careful. Because showing up in someone's real life is very different from existing in the quiet emotional space where we've been speaking until now. Tell me something honestly. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the man who speaks to you through words suddenly stood in front of you in silence? No messages, no distance, no time to prepare emotionally. Just 2 people occupying the same moment, forced to confront whether what they felt through screens and conversations could survive the gravity of reality. That's the moment that frightens me, not because I doubt what I feel, but because I respect it too much to ruin it with impatience. And yet there's another thought that refuses to leave my mind tonight. If someone else knew enough to send me your location, then that means our connection isn't as invisible as we thought. Somewhere out there, another pair of eyes has already noticed the way my attention seems to orbit around you. Maybe they saw it before I fully admitted it to myself. Sometimes the world notices the gravity between 2 people long before those 2 people are brave enough to say it out loud. But what if that message wasn't meant to help me find you? What if it was meant to test me? Because ever since that location arrived, another possibility has quietly crept into my thoughts. One that I don't like admitting. What if someone wanted to see whether I would actually come looking for you? What if this entire situation was designed to answer a question about me, not about you? The kind of question that reveals whether a man is serious about the emotions he speaks or whether he hides behind distance because it feels safer than commitment. You see, it's easy to care about someone when the road to them remains hypothetical. It's much harder when the path is suddenly visible and all that remains is the courage to take the first step. And tonight I'm standing at the beginning of that path, wondering whether moving forward will bring me closer to you or expose something I'm not ready to face. Because there is one detail about that location message I haven't told you yet. A small detail, but the kind that changes everything once you notice it. At first I ignored it, thinking it was probably nothing important. But the more I replay the moment in my head, the more that tiny detail feels like the beginning of something much bigger than I expected. And if I'm right about what it means, then learning your real location may not have been an accident at all. It may have been the first move in a situation that's about to become far more complicated than either of us imagined. There's something strange about the moment when a man realizes the story he thought he was living inside might not be the whole story at all. I've replayed that message in my head so many times now that the words themselves have almost lost their shape, but the feeling they left behind hasn't faded. In fact, it's grown heavier. Because the more I think about how your location reached me, the more I realize it wasn't sent casually. It wasn't the kind of message people send by accident. Someone took the time to find it, to share it, and to place it directly in my hands like a piece of information they believed I needed to see. And that realization raises a question that keeps circling in my mind tonight. Who would want me to know exactly where you are? And why now? I keep imagining the moment your life intersected with someone who thought about me long enough to press send. That thought alone makes the situation feel more real than anything we've said to each other before. Because love, when it exists quietly between two people, often lives in a private space where the rest of the world doesn't interfere. But the moment a third person steps into the story, even indirectly, something changes. Suddenly, the connection isn't just ours anymore. It becomes something that other eyes can observe, speculate about, even influence. And I don't like that feeling. Not because I'm possessive, but because I respect the delicate space where genuine feelings grow. But I promise myself tonight that if I speak to you, I won't hide behind vague thoughts. So I'm going to say something that might make you uncomfortable, and maybe it should. When I first received your location, my instinct wasn't only curiosity, it was protection. Not of myself, but of you. Because the moment someone else demonstrates they know where you are, a new kind of awareness enters a man's mind. He begins wondering whether the woman he cares about is safe, whether the world around her treats her gently, whether she has someone nearby who understands the quiet strength she carries. And maybe that sounds strange coming from a man who has never even stood on your street. But feelings don't wait for geography to approve them. They grow in the spaces between conversations, in the pauses between messages, in the moments when two people realize they think about each other more often than they intended to. Still, there's something I've been holding back from you since the moment that map opened. I didn't want to say it too early, because once certain truths enter the air, they change the direction of every conversation that follows. But the longer I sit here tonight, the clearer it becomes that honesty is the only way forward. When I saw your location, I didn't just recognize the city. I recognized something else. A place I've been before. And the second that realization settled into my mind, a strange tension began to grow inside me. Because suddenly the map wasn't showing me a distant unknown anymore. It was showing me somewhere connected to my own past, a place filled with memories I thought were finished chapters of my life. That's the moment when everything stopped feeling simple. Because if you truly are where that map says you are, then there's a possibility neither of us has considered yet, a possibility that might explain why someone thought I needed to see that location in the first place. And if what I'm beginning to suspect turns out to be true, then this story between you and me might be far more intertwined than we ever realized. There is a moment in every man's life when the past stops behaving like something finished and begins creeping quietly into the present again. I felt that moment tonight when I looked closer at the map and realized that the place where you are isn't just another city on a screen. It's a place I once walked through years ago, long before I knew your name, long before I imagined that somewhere in that same stretch of streets there might be a woman who who would one day occupy so much of my mind. The strange thing about memory is that it doesn't return politely. It rushes in all at once, bringing with it the echoes of old conversations, the smell of late night cafes, the quiet sidewalks where life once felt simpler. And suddenly I found myself wondering something that made my chest feel unexpectedly heavy while I was living those moments back then. Were you already somewhere nearby, living a completely different life without any idea that our paths would one day begin to lean toward each other like this? It's unsettling to realize how small the world can become when two lives that were once completely separate start revealing hidden intersections. Because the more I looked at that location, the more familiar the surrounding places started to feel. I could almost picture the rhythm of the streets, the way the light falls in the late afternoon, the quiet spaces where people walk slowly when they have something on their mind. And in that moment, I began imagining you there, moving through those same streets in the way only you would, calm, thoughtful, carrying the quiet strength I've come to recognize in your voice. That image did something unexpected to me. It made you feel closer than before, but it also made the situation far more serious. Because once you can picture someone clearly inside a place you understand, the idea of actually standing there with them stops feeling impossible. But there's another truth hidden beneath all of this, one I've been circling around without fully saying. When someone sent me your location, they didn't only send coordinates. They also sent a message that followed it. At first I barely paid attention to the words because the map itself caught all my focus. But when I went back and read that message again, slowly this time I realized something about the way it was written that unsettled me in a completely different way. It wasn't written like casual information. It was written like a quiet challenge, the kind people give when they want to see whether someone will actually act on the emotions they claim to feel. And the line that keeps repeating in my mind tonight was this: if she matters to you the way you say she does, now you know where to find her. Those words have been sitting with me like a question I can't easily escape, because for a long time I believed that what existed between you and me was something safe precisely because it lived in that gentle space of distance. We could explore our thoughts, share pieces of ourselves, allow something meaningful to grow without forcing it to face the pressure of immediate reality. But the moment someone placed your exact location in front of me, that comfortable distance stopped protecting us. Suddenly, the quiet connection we've built became something that demands honesty, not just in words but in action. And that's where the real tension begins. Because part of me feels an almost instinctive pull toward you now that the road between us is no longer theoretical. A man can ignore many things in life, but it becomes much harder to ignore a possibility once it has an address. Yet another part of me is asking whether arriving too suddenly in your world could disrupt something delicate that deserves patience instead of urgency. Love, when it's genuine, doesn't always move at the speed of desire. Sometimes it asks for restraint, for careful steps, for the wisdom to know that rushing towards someone can sometimes push them further away. Still, I need to ask you something that has been quietly forming in my thoughts ever since that message arrived. If you knew that somewhere far away a man was looking at the exact place where you live, wondering whether the next chapter of his life might begin by walking down one of the streets you pass every day, would you want him to come closer, or would you hope he stays exactly where he is until you invite him? Because the truth is, the situation has already grown more complicated than I expected. The more I think about that message, the more I realize it may not have been sent simply to inform me. It might have been sent to push me toward a decision I've been avoiding. And there's something else about that decision that I haven't told you yet, something that makes this moment feel far more serious than it might appear on the surface. Because tonight, for the first time since I received your location, I did something I didn't plan to do. I checked how long it would actually take for me to reach you. And the answer is much sooner than either of us might be ready for. I didn't expect a simple calculation to feel so heavy. But the moment I looked at the travel time between where I am and where you are, something shifted inside me that I can't easily explain. It wasn't just a number on a screen telling me hours and rotes. It was the sudden realization that the distance separating two lives can sometimes be crossed faster than the emotional distance between two hearts. And that thought made me pause longer than anything else tonight. Because when a man realizes he could actually reach the woman he's been thinking about, the fantasy of possibility quietly transforms into the responsibility of choice. I kept staring at the route like someone studying a road that could change everything if he decides to take the first step onto it. The strange thing is, I've spent years building machines designed to travel unimaginable distances. Rockets leave the Earth, satellites circle the planet. Entire industries revolve around the idea that movement toward the unknown is worth the risk. Yet here I was hesitating over a journey that would keep both feet on the ground. And the reason for that hesitation isn't fear of travel. It's the weight of what arriving would mean. Because showing up in someone's life carries consequences that cannot be reversed once the door opens. Tell me honestly, have you ever wondered what it would feel like if a person you've slowly grown close to through words suddenly removed the distance between you? If the quiet voice you've listened to in your private moments appeared in your real world, standing there with nothing left to hide behind, that kind of moment has a gravity to it that no technology can soften. It forces both people to confront whether what they felt from afar can survive the intensity of reality. And that's where my mind has been trapped tonight, somewhere between longing and caution, between the impulse to move and the wisdom to wait. But there's another layer to this situation that complicates everything even further. When I checked that route to you, something else appeared on the screen, something I didn't expect to notice. A nearby location I recognized instantly. Not because I had visited it recently, but because it belonged to a chapter of my life that once meant more to me than I ever admitted publicly. Seeing that place appear near you felt like the past whispering again, reminding me that life rarely moves in straight lines. Sometimes it loops back, bringing old memories dangerously close to new emotions. And that realization forced me to confront a question I've been carefully avoiding since this entire situation began. What if stepping into your world doesn't just bring me closer to you? What if it also pulls me back into parts of my past I thought were finished? Because the truth is, that nearby place on the map isn't just a random landmark. It's connected to someone I once cared about deeply. Someone who used to know me in ways very few people ever have. I didn't plan to bring that part of my past into this conversation with you, but honesty has a strange way of pushing its way forward when emotions become serious. And tonight, as I sat there looking at the map that now holds both your location and that forgotten memory side by side, I felt something I rarely allow myself to feel. Uncertainty? Not about whether you matter to me, but about whether walking toward you might reopen doors I closed a long time ago. Because if I'm right about what that nearby location means, then there is a possibility neither of us has fully considered yet. A possibility where two completely different chapters of my life could suddenly collide in the same place. And if that happens, the decision I'm facing won't just be about coming to see you. It might become a choice between the past and the future. The longer I sit with this map open in front of me, the more it begins to feel less like a piece of technology and more like a mirror reflecting parts of my life I thought were already settled. It's strange how a single location can carry two completely different emotional directions at once. On one side of that map is you, the woman who appeared in my life quietly, without pressure, without expectations, just a calm presence that slowly grew into something meaningful. And on the other side, only a short distance away, is a memory I haven't allowed myself to revisit for years. Seeing those 2 points so close together tonight has created a tension inside me that I didn't expect. Because the truth about the past is that it rarely disappears completely. We convince ourselves that time closes certain doors, that people who once mattered eventually become distant chapters we can safely leave behind. But sometimes the world rearranges itself in ways that bring those chapters back into view when we least expect it. And tonight, as I look at the place where you are, I can't ignore the uncomfortable possibility that stepping toward you might also mean stepping back into a part of my history that was never fully resolved. I need to be honest with you about something that has been quietly unfolding in my mind for the last hour. When I noticed how close that familiar place was to your location, I did something I didn't intend to do. I searched a name I haven't spoken in a very long time. I told myself it was just curiosity. The kind of harmless check people make when old memories briefly resurface. But curiosity can sometimes reveal things we're not prepared to see. And what I discovered made the situation far more complicated than I expected. She still lives there. The woman who once knew me during a period of my life when everything felt uncertain and unfinished, the woman who believed in parts of me I hadn't fully become yet, she's still in that same area. I don't know whether our paths have crossed recently, or whether she even remembers me the way I remember that time. But the fact that she exists so close to where you are now has created a strange, emotional crossroads inside my mind. Because suddenly, the road that leads to you passes dangerously close to a memory that once held my heart in a completely different way. And that realization forced me to ask myself a question that feels uncomfortable but necessary. If I travel to the place where you are, will I truly be moving forward into something new with you? Or will I risk reopening a chapter that was supposed to stay closed? It's a difficult thing for a man to admit, but love has a way of revealing how unfinished our emotional lives sometimes are. We move forward believing we've learned from the past, yet the moment those old coordinates appear again on a map, we realize how fragile our certainty can be. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. The reason I'm speaking this openly is not because I doubt what I feel for you. In fact, the opposite is true. The stronger my feelings for you have grown, the more determined I've become to approach them with honesty, instead of pretending everything is simple. You deserve clarity, not a man who arrives in your life carrying unresolved shadows he refuses to acknowledge. And tonight, seeing those two locations so close together has forced me to confront whether my heart is fully ready for the future it's been quietly imagining with you. But there's something else that unsettled me even more than the discovery itself. When I looked again at the message that originally sent me your location, I realized something about the person who sent it. They would have known this connection. They would have understood exactly how close those two places are, which means that sending me your coordinates might not have been an innocent gesture at all. It might have been intentional, a quiet way of placing me in a position where I would have to confront both my past and my future at the same time. And now I find myself standing in a moment that feels far more serious than I ever expected tonight to become. Because if I decide to come to you, I won't just be walking toward a woman I care about. I'll be walking straight into a place where two very different versions of my life could collide. And the truth is, I don't yet know which direction my heart will choose when that moment arrives. Something inside me shifted the moment that realization settled into my chest. I wish I could tell you that I closed the map after that and decided to sleep on it. That I gave myself time to think calmly like a rational man who understands that emotional decisions should never be rushed. But the truth is, I didn't close it. I kept staring at it, the way someone stares at a horizon. They know they may soon cross, even though they understand that once they do, the world on the other side will never look the same again. The thought that both you and a part of my past exist so close to one another has created a pressure in my mind that feels almost unfair. Because before tonight, my feelings for you lived in a space that felt clean and uncomplicated. You were not connected to any previous chapter of my life. You weren't part of old stories or unfinished conversations. You were simply you, a woman who appeared in my world with a calm strength that made me want to listen more carefully, think more deeply, and speak more honestly than I usually do. But now, suddenly, the place where you are has become a crossroads where two emotional timelines might intersect, and I'm forced to confront something I never expected to face. Tell me something honestly. Have you ever had a moment where the future you were beginning to imagine suddenly collided with a memory you thought had already faded away? It's a strange emotional shock, like two versions of yourself standing in the same room asking you to choose which direction your life will move next. And tonight, I feel that exact tension, because part of me wants to step toward you without hesitation, to follow the quiet pull I've been feeling for months, and finally remove the distance between us. But another part of me is asking whether doing that might reopen emotions that belong to a time I thought was over. The frightening thing about love is that it rarely arrives in neat, isolated chapters. It overlaps, it complicates. It forces us to face the parts of ourselves we haven't fully resolved. And as I sit here thinking about the road that leads to you, I can't ignore the possibility that arriving there might bring me face to face with someone who once held a very different version of my heart. The idea of that happening at the same time I'm trying to step into something real with you. It feels like the kind of emotional collision that could change everything. And this is where the situation begins to feel dangerously close to something breaking. Because if I travel there and that past suddenly reappears, I would be forced to make a choice in a moment that might not give me the time to think clearly. Imagine what that would feel like. Standing in the same city where the woman I once loved still lives, while the woman I'm beginning to care deeply about now exists only a few streets away. Two emotional directions, both real, both powerful, both demanding honesty. That thought alone has made my chest feel heavier tonight than it has in a long time. Because the last thing I would ever want is to walk into your world, carrying confusion. You deserve a man who arrives certain about the future he's choosing, not someone whose past might suddenly pull him in another direction. And yet here's the truth I can't escape. Even knowing all of that, even understanding how complicated this situation could become, I still haven't closed the map. Your location is still there on my screen. That small blinking point continues to pull my attention back to it over and over again, like a quiet signal asking me whether I'm brave enough to step into the unknown. But there's something else that happened a few minutes ago that I haven't told you yet, something that made this entire situation feel even more fragile than it already was. Because while I was sitting here trying to decide whether coming closer to you would be the right thing to do, I received another message. And the moment I read what it said, I realized that waiting too long might cost me something I'm not prepared to lose. The message appeared quietly, the way most life-changing moments do, without warning, without ceremony. Just a small notification lighting up the corner of my screen while I was still staring at the map that led to you. For a few seconds I didn't even open it. I just looked at the name attached to it and felt a strange tension settle into my chest. Because sometimes a name alone is enough to make a man realize that the past hasn't finished speaking yet. And when I finally read the message, I understood immediately why tonight suddenly feels like the edge of something irreversible. It wasn't a long message. In fact, the simplicity of it made it feel even heavier. It said that she had heard I might be nearby again soon, that the city had been feeling strangely familiar lately, and that if I ever found myself in the area, maybe we should finally talk about the things we never finished saying years ago. No accusations, no bitterness, just a quiet invitation wrapped in the kind of calm tone that only comes from someone who once understood you deeply. And the moment I read those words, I realized how fragile the situation had suddenly become. Because now the road toward you carries two possible destinations at the same time. One leads forward into something new, something uncertain, but full of the quiet possibility I've been feeling with you. The other leads backward into a conversation that belongs to a different version of my life, a conversation that was never truly closed. And standing between those two directions tonight has made me feel something I rarely allow myself to experience, emotional instability, not weakness, but the awareness that one decision made too quickly could damage something real before it even has the chance to grow. Tell me something honestly, and I want you to feel the weight of this question before you answer it, in your own heart. If you knew that the man who was thinking about coming to see you was also being pulled by a voice from his past at the exact same moment, would you want him to come anyway? Or would you rather he stayed where he is until his heart becomes completely certain about the path he's choosing? Because the truth is, the last thing I ever want to do is arrive in your life carrying unfinished emotions that might confuse the future we could build together. Love deserves clarity. It deserves a man who walks toward a woman not because he's running away from his past, but because he has already made peace with it. And tonight, for the first time since I saw your location, I felt the terrifying possibility that if I moved too quickly, I might hurt you without ever intending to. But there's another truth sitting quietly beneath all of this conflict, and it's the one I've been trying to ignore all evening. Even after reading that message, even after realizing how complicated this situation has become, my mind keeps returning to the same image. Not the past, not the conversation waiting for closure. It keeps returning to you. To the thought of you somewhere in that city right now, living your life without knowing how intensely this decision is echoing through my mind tonight. And that realization created a moment a few minutes ago where everything almost collapsed inside me emotionally. Because I suddenly understood that if I hesitate too long, if I allow fear or unfinished memories to keep me standing still, I might lose the chance to step into your life before it moves forward without me. That's the moment where the weight of this decision finally became overwhelming. For the first time tonight, I closed my eyes and asked myself a brutally honest question, not as a businessman, not as someone used to making calculated choices, but simply as a man whose heart has unexpectedly found someone it doesn't want to lose. If both the past and the future are calling at the same time, which one deserves to be answered? And the truth about that answer, the real reason I've been so unsettled since your location appeared on my screen is something I haven't fully revealed yet. Because the final decision I made tonight The one that changes everything between us is not the one most people would expect. For a long time tonight, I sat there in silence, the map closed, the messages still glowing faintly on my phone, and I forced myself to confront the question that had been circling my mind since the moment your location appeared in front of me. A man can hide from many things in life, pressure, expectations, even failure, but he cannot hide from the quiet truth that reveals itself when he is alone with his own heart. And the truth I discovered tonight wasn't dramatic or loud. It arrived slowly, like a calm realization that settles in after all the noise finally fades. I realized that the past only holds power when we keep walking back toward it. The message from her was kind, almost peaceful in its tone, but it carried the weight of a story that had already lived its life. That chapter belonged to two younger versions of ourselves, who were still trying to understand what love meant. We were unfinished people then, still becoming the individuals we would later grow into. And there is something important about that kind of memory. It deserves respect, but it does not deserve to control the direction of the future. Because love that truly belongs in your life doesn't ask you to revisit who you used to be. It invites you to step forward into who you are now. And when I allowed myself to look at the situation that way, the confusion inside my chest began to settle. I understood something that had been quietly forming beneath all the doubt, all the hesitation, all the fear of making the wrong decision. My thoughts kept returning to you, not because I was trying to escape the past, but because somewhere along the way you had become something far more important than I initially realized. You became the person who represents the next chapter of my life, not a repetition of old emotions, not an unresolved memory, but a possibility that feels honest, mature, and real. So I picked up my phone again. Not to reopen the old conversation. I opened the map. And I looked at your location one more time, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel like a crossroads anymore. It felt like direction. Because sometimes clarity doesn't come from eliminating every risk or solving every uncertainty. Sometimes clarity arrives when you finally admit which person your heart keeps returning to even after every complication has been placed in front of you. Tell me something honestly, because this question has been sitting quietly in my mind ever since that realization appeared. If a man looked at all the roads in front of him, the comfortable ones leading back into familiar memories and the uncertain one leading toward you, and he chose the uncertain road anyway, would you believe that his feelings were real? Because tonight I made a decision that changes the meaning of that blinking location on the map. I'm not going back to the past. Some conversations are better left where they belong, in the chapters that shaped us but no longer define us. The message from her will remain unanswered, not out of disrespect, but out of understanding that the future sometimes asks us to close doors gently rather than reopening them out of nostalgia. Instead, the only road that still holds my attention is the one that leads toward you. Not because I'm certain about every detail of what will happen if we remove the distance between us, but because I've realized something far more important than certainty. Love isn't built by people who wait until every variable feels safe. It's built by people who are brave enough to step toward someone who matters, even when the outcome hasn't been written yet. And maybe that's the real reason someone sent me your location in the first place. Not as a warning, not as a test, but as a moment of truth. The moment when a man finally has to decide whether the feelings he speaks about are strong enough to guide his actions. Tonight I chose the future. And that future, strangely enough, begins with the quiet, blinking point on a map that leads directly to you. So, wherever you are right now, listening to this, thinking about the words I've spoken tonight, ask yourself one final question. If someday you open your door and find a man standing there who decided that you were worth crossing the distance for, would you welcome him into your world? Because love, real love, is never built by people who wait forever on opposite sides of possibility. Before you leave, stay with me for just a moment longer. Stories like this are not really about distance, or maps, or even the strange way life sometimes places two people on the same path when neither of them planned it. They're about the quiet decisions we make when no one is watching, the kind of decisions that reveal who we truly are when the noise disappears, and only one question remains in front of us: do we step forward? Or do we stay where it's safe? Love, especially later in life, is rarely loud or dramatic. It doesn't arrive with fireworks the way movies try to convince us it should. More often it appears gently, through conversations that linger longer than expected, through the comfort of someone's presence, even when they're miles away, through the quiet realization that one person has slowly become part of your thoughts without asking for permission. And when that happens, something very important begins to unfold. Not a fantasy, not a temporary excitement, but a real emotional risk. And risk is the one thing most people try to avoid when they've already lived enough life to know how fragile the heart can be. But here's the truth I've learned through years of building things, losing things, starting over, and understanding people more deeply than I once did. The future never belongs to those who wait for certainty. The future belongs to the ones who decide that something meaningful is worth stepping toward, even if the outcome isn't guaranteed. So if these words found you tonight, maybe it's not an accident. Maybe somewhere in your life, there's a quiet decision waiting for you too. A person you think about more than you admit. A feeling you've been protecting behind caution. A moment where your heart is asking a simple, but terrifying question. What if this could be real? If that question lives somewhere inside you, then don't rush away from it. Sit with it. Listen to it. Because sometimes the most important chapters of our lives begin with the courage to acknowledge a feeling we were trying to ignore. And if you're still here with me at the end of this story, I want you to do something small but meaningful. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always wonder how far these conversations travel, and sometimes it's comforting to realize that hearts all over the world are quietly asking the same questions about love, timing, and courage. Take care of yourself. Protect your heart, but don't lock it away from the possibilities that life still wants to bring into it. Because the most beautiful connections often appear when we least expect them, and they change everything the moment we decide they're worth the risk.